Hi there, my name is Sean Moles and I'd like to show you in this DVD the techniques required to locate, hook and land more carp on fly. I had a lot of fun making this DVD. Fly fishing for carp is my passion and I really hope that you enjoy it. Obviously it's very difficult to catch carp on fly if there aren't any in your area, but if there are spots that hold good populations of carp, then you can have a lot of fun. What I usually like to do if I hear about a new place or I see a piece of water is just to do a recce to find out A, if there are carp in the water, B, how deep the spot is, how clear the water is, and also how many carp I can see. To do this, I leave the fly rod at home and I make sure that I take my polarized sunglasses and a wide brimmed hat, and sometimes it takes a while to spot where the carp are. Just be patient, walk around a lot and have a good look at all of the likely areas. This pond has a nice island in it, the water is not too deep, average depth of about 2 meters with a lot of shallow areas as well, and lots of reed beds as well, which is good. Finally located some carp bubbles and was cruising carp, so I know that there's a lot of carp in here. How do I know? Well, I can see a lot of carp bubbles coming up as they feed. This one's feeding on the top, which is always a good sign. There are more carp bubbles. This one is feeding very actively, so there's obviously salt beds and bloodworm, which is their primary food source. Ideally what I'm looking for is a place where I can spot carp feeding, hopefully, and also a spot that's not too deep, deeper than 1.5 meters, and it gets very difficult to present the fly accurately. However, if the fish are very aggressive on the top, then you can still catch them on a large dry fly in deeper water. I like to locate fish quite late in the day because the sun will be higher, and this helps me to spot them much easier. It's very difficult to spot fish early in the morning, although you can have a look out for the feeding bubbles. After 10 minutes of watching the water, this place is looking very promising. There's a good head of carp. They get up to about 4 or 5 kilograms from what I've seen, but the average size is about 1 to 2 kilograms, which is okay for fly fishing. These are midge shucks, so there's a lot of food in the water, and this is all good news. On small ponds like this it's quite easy to locate your carp, but on bigger waters it can be a lot trickier. Try to look for secluded bays, any area with structure like reed beds and weed beds as well, and also look out for inlets into the dam. These are normally prime spots to locate carp. There's a large area at the back of this pond with a lot of reed beds in shallow water, and I'm sure that will be a good place to stalk carp, so I'll come back here a bit later and try for these fish. Because of the reed beds I'm going to have to use a heavier rod, and I'm sure that the Marabou Carp SMS will do the job. The black and red color works well in this kind of water. Now I'm going to show you the actual technique of stalking carp and fly at close range. Return to the same pond. It's the first time that I'll be fishing it. The back end of this lake is excellent because of the extensive reed beds that afford the carp cover. There's quite a few of them feeding in very shallow water, and I can get close to them because of the cover of the reed beds. Using size 10 SMS carp fly, which is ideal for these smaller carp. Let's see how I get on. In this type of water it's crucial to walk very slowly and softly. I'm wearing camouflage clothing, wide brimmed hat and a pair of sunglasses. I'm trying to dip that carp fly as close as possible to the fish's lips. Dip the fly, get it as close as possible, watch the fish's reaction, set the hook as soon as the carp sucks the fly in, using a 6-weight rod, and I have to really put as much pressure on this fish as possible so that they don't break me off in the reeds. This is a beautiful mirror carp. As you can see, it's not very happy with me right now. This is where you need the backbone of the 6-weight rod just to lead the fish out of the danger area back into open water. I was fortunate enough to get very close to this fish, and that makes catching them a lot easier. That window of opportunity with these fish is right in front of their eyes and straight in front of the lips basically. The closer that you can get the fly to this area, the better. Bring this carp to hand. Pretty mirror carp, and the scale patterns on every single mirror carp is different. It's like a fingerprint. Beautiful fish, good condition, and there's that fly in the lips. Time for the release. Here's another carp feeding right in the reed beds where they feel secure, and his back's right out the water. The water's that shallow. Biding my time, waiting for the fish to move into open water. Dip the fly right in front of the fish's mouth. This is our closest fish, so I have to actually retreat a bit and fish on. That's a good fish. Now it's a case of putting maximum pressure on the fish and hoping that he doesn't have the power to get me in the reed beds, because there's no way I'd be able to get him out again. Using a 6-weight floating line, 1x tippet, which is about 5.6 odd kilograms, and that gives you the power to play these smallish fish. Admire the fish, tweak the hook out and release him. When you wade in these areas, it's best to shuffle your feet very slowly. I've got a fish right in front of me. I'm going to dip the fly and fish on. That's how easy it is when these fish are feeding actively and you don't spook them. Note I said don't spook them. That's the whole trick here. Gotta walk very gently. And that's another pretty little common carp. Time to release this one and give the area a bit of a rest, and then stalk the next one. Got several fish in front of me now, but the one looks a little bit bigger than the rest, so this is a bit dangerous stalking this one. Fish on, and he broke me off. A little bit too big, I think. Happened so quickly. Time to retie and move on to the next area. I've put on a putty indicator now just to help me detect those subtle takes. The water's quite murky here. Dip the fly right in front of a feeding fish, takes it, and I set the hook. Play the fish as hard as possible to keep him out of those reed beds. Now this is fun fishing. Don't try this with a big carp, because you'll come off second best, that's for sure. Play this fish out. Here's the marabou SMS in the side of the carp's lips. Pretty 1 kilogram common carp. And let's watch this in slow motion. Dip the fly, carp eats it, set the hook instantly and fish on. It's hard to believe, but I've been fly fishing for carp now for more than 2 decades, and I've had an enormous amount of fun with this amazing species. These carp grow incredibly large, they're strong, they are readily available all over the country, and they're also very challenging to catch and fly, which I think puts many people off. One of the big things for me about carp is just how different they all are. They're all such characters. When I first started fly fishing for carp, there wasn't very much information available. Hardly anyone did it at the time, and in fact many people thought that it was impossible to catch carp on fly. I, on the other hand, didn't know any different or any better, so one day I decided to go down to Princess Flay and try for some carp on fly. I had been hooking into them on bait before, so I tied up a fly the night before on a size 12 hook using white wool, and it resembled a little maggot, if anything. When I got to the water's edge, I found that the water was incredibly clear and there were groups of carp cruising just under the surface. As luck had it, on my first cast, as the fly sank, a nice sized carp detached itself from the group, swam over to my fly and inhaled it. I set the hook, and that carp was as firmly hooked as I was. It took me about 2 years to really work out how to catch carp properly on fly, and I developed certain flies that worked extremely well for them. This picture was taken in about 1988 and it was my biggest carp at that time. This one was about carp number 4 that I caught on a Hamill's killer. Here's another one that I caught on my early glass fiber rod. At that stage I mainly fished at Princess Flay and next door at Little Princess Flay, which had some very aggressive carp in it, but it was heavily weeded at the time. This is an early fly box with a few woody buggers and other flies in a bicycle repair box lined with foam. Around about in 1991 I met an excellent angler by the name of Leon Goodman, who used to catch a lot of big carp on art lure, and I learnt a lot of tricks from him. At that stage he had 3 South African carp records to his name, caught on art lure. This was one of the biggest ones I caught at that time, 14.5 kilograms. But one of the techniques that he taught me was to cast over the fish quite a long way and then draw the fly back. This carp weighed 13 kilograms and this one also 14, and that technique of casting over the fish without spooking them, then drawing the fly and letting it sink and leaving it, was crucial to my success on the species. This is an early fly box of about 1994. You can see the carp bugger has started to evolve at this time, and that caught me many hundreds of very good carp. This is a Breda River specimen. These very well proportioned common carp were caught in the Leesbeek River on yellow flies, and I did very well in this particular river on yellow flies. This is a carp from Coastal Park and this one is from Sunflay. It was about this time that I started to develop the carp fritz as an easier way to tie a carp bugger, and it accounted for these beautiful fish. And this one is in my book Freshwater Fishing in South Africa. That was caught at Princess Flay and weighed almost 9 kilograms. This is a mirror carp. I caught relatively few in the beginning because of the places that I fished. This is Coastal Park again, into a really big carp that was hooked on a bloodworm pattern. This is a cruising carp at Sunflay, and there's a whole stack of them over here. These were great to target on fly. This is Fall Flay. This is the Berg River. When I first started fly fishing for carp, there weren't many other people doing it, but now I can safely say that there are a lot more that are enjoying this great species on fly, and I'm confident that this trend will continue. And after over 20 years of fly fishing for carp, it's still my favorite species, and I love every minute that I can get out there and catch them. Now let's take a closer look at the technique of getting a carp to take the fly. But first we will discuss body language, the ability to discern what the carp is doing can be critical in knowing whether it will take a fly or not. When you've managed to find a group of carp, there are 6 stages that they can be in. The first is cruising, second is sleeping, the third is feeding, the fourth is resting, the fifth is spooked, and lastly the sixth one is spawning. Of all of these, the one that you hope that they will be doing is feeding. Cruising carp are very difficult to catch on fly unless they are about to feed or have just been feeding. But normally a cruising carp is one that is not interested in feeding. Obviously a sleeping carp is pretty much impossible to catch, and a spooked carp is one that you've messed up on and is on its way elsewhere. So always try to look for feeding carp. These carp are feeding very aggressively, and these are prime targets to cast a fly to. So this is the kind of thing that you are looking for. This is first prize. This is the type of situation that really gets my heart racing. There's a lot of carp here, they're in very shallow water and they're all feeding aggressively. This is exactly what I look for. The more carp there are to target in a day, the more successful you will be. It's as simple as that. Here we have a carp feeding in very shallow water, close to the edge, and looking at the body language of this fish, I'm sure that it will take a fly. I like to target carp when the sun is quite high, and preferably with the sun behind me. The reason is that the carp don't like to look into the sun, and this can mask you from them. You can get very close to them without them actually being aware of your presence. This is very important because carp normally can be extremely spooky. I like to travel light, have everything on me that I need so that I can cover lots of water in a day. Sight fishing for carp is impossible without polarized sunglasses, so that's the first thing. Make sure that you have a good pair of polarized sunglasses and a wide brimmed hat to cut out glare, and you'll spot more fish. All of my fly fishing for carp is done with a floating line, normally weight forward, and this is simply because if you miscast with a floating line you can just pick the line up and recast. With a sinking line the line sinks and you have to strip all of it in before you can recast again, and also the carp don't like the line to run over their back, and this is very easy to do with a sinking line. With a floating line this very rarely happens, so it's a huge plus. I cannot stress this enough. Always look for feeding fish when trying to target them on fly. This one is actively feeding in very shallow water. In fact its back is right out the water. So I know that if I get the right presentation to this carp, there's a high percentage chance that it will suck the fly in. Let's look at the technique again. The best way to catch carp on fly is to cast the fly over the fish quite a long way, draw the fly back quickly and let it sink, and don't strip it, just leave it. If the fish sucks the fly in, you need to set the hook as quickly as possible. I always look at the fly as well as the fish. If I lose the fly I can always judge what's happening by watching the fish. The fish is feeding and it suddenly stops and shoots forward to where my fly should be. I always set the hook as soon as it stops because there's a good chance that it would have sucked the fly in. If you lose sight of the fly and you see the carp's head starting to shake vigorously, set the hook. What's happened is that the carp has sucked the fly in and hooked itself. Fortunately you don't need much force to set the hook at close range, so don't strike too hard. Although there are a lot of flies that I have developed that work extremely well for carp, there are others that are commercially available that work almost as well. First one is the black woolly worm in about a size 10 with a red tag. The other fly that works well is a white death. The black Zulu in about a size 8 with a beadhead is also a dynamite carp fly. If you spot bubbles and silt like this in an area, try to get there as quickly as possible. I like to target carp that are in 1 meter or less of water. Any deeper than this and it gets progressively harder to catch them on fly. This fishes in structure in very shallow water, so it's easier to present the fly. I see it eat the fly, set the hook and it's on. This is textbook stuff. The closer that you can get to the carp without spooking it, the better. If you can simply dip that fly in front of the fish, Firstly, you have accuracy. Secondly, the fly enters the water with very little splash, and these are all good things. The worst thing that you can do is to cast the fly directly in front of the fish so it lands with a splat, because this will more than likely spook the fish. The best technique is to cast the fly well past the fish so that you don't spook it. If the carp wants it, it will swim over to the fly and suck it in. This one sucked the fly in, but it was too slow. They can be very quick in ejecting the fly sometimes. In this particular case, I've got everything right. I've cast over the fish, I've drawn the fly quickly, and then let it sink right in front of the fish's mouth. Fish sucks it in, set the hook, and it's on. Job well done. Let's watch this again. Cast the fly over the fish, draw it very quickly, and then let it sink. I wonder how many carp I've missed in my life because I haven't seen it suck the fly in. And look at that carp move. I'm sorry if I sound like a stuck record, but this technique of letting the fly lie there is critical. If you strip that fly for any reason, it very rarely works. In fact, it normally spooks the carp. So the technique, in recap, is to cast the fly past the fish, draw it, and let it sink and leave it. Let's look at the carp's window. Carp's window is right in front of the fish's mouth. This is where the fish will look for food, not behind it or on the side. It's right in front of the fish's mouth and normally quite close. This is critical. If you don't cast the fly and get it close enough, you're wasting your time for this species. If you find a large group of feeding carp, then it's very important that you try to target the closest ones first. If you cast over the closer ones, trying to get at the ones at the back, you normally will spook them, and their action of swimming for the horizon will spook the rest of the shoal. Be patient, bide your time, and go for your best shot. If you cast a lot and false cast a lot, you tend to spook these fish very easily. The sad fact of the matter is that a spooked carp will not eat your fly. Although I've mainly targeted carp in South Africa, the techniques that I've detailed here have worked for other anglers throughout the world. So I'm sure if you are outside of South Africa, the techniques detailed in this DVD will definitely work in your area. Although carp do eat a lot of plant matter, they primarily focus on insects in the larval stage of development, including a lot of midges. They eat mayflies, dragonflies, damselflies, anything that they can find. This is good news if you're a fly fisherman. They also eat small fish, fish eggs, tadpoles, small crabs, just about anything they can find. Fly fishing for trout and bass can be very forgiving because these fish will move a long way to intercept the fly. The difference is that carp often won't. All that this fish needs to do to find food is to root around in the mud and sediment and pick up insects this way. So why should it chase after a fly? These koi carp, some of which are worth a lot of money, are a carp that has been selectively bred to have these colorful patterns on them. The Japanese have done this over centuries. Many river systems in the Western Cape, like the Berg River here, the Liesbeek and the Easter, have populations of koi and the similar ghost carp. These are great fun to try to target on fly. One thing that I've noticed over the years is that a carp that is in open water can be incredibly spooky and very reluctant to eat a fly. But if that same carp moves off into an area with structure, like reed beds, weed beds, sunken trees, anything like that, it will often throw all caution to the wind and inhale the fly. The reason for this is that a carp that moves into an area with structure feels a lot more secure, and it's much more likely to feed actively in these areas. Well, that's enough about that subject. Let's go and look at some other techniques that are successful for carp on fly. I'm selecting a black and red marabou carp fly, and I'm going to use it in conjunction with a floating patchy indicator, because the carp that I'm about to try for are mudding, but they're not releasing any bubbles, and it's very difficult to figure out where the head is. Got to make as many casts as possible with this fly, and sooner or later the fly should sink right in front of a feeding carp's mouth. This is the theory anyway. The indicator is set over depth, and it's there purely to show up those subtle little tags as the carp sucks the fly in. This requires a lot of concentration. Drag the fly into position. If it's not right, cast again. It's all about pinpoint accuracy. If I can see the carp's tail and judge the direction properly, then I can definitely get the fly right in front of the carp's mouth. Watching that indicator jerks, I strike and I'm in. Looks like a good fish, and it's heading off into the horizon at great speed. This is what fly fishing for carp is all about. Adopting a low fighting stance now, trying to bring this carp in as quickly as possible, using a 6-weight 9-foot rod with a lot of backbone, and I'm playing the carp as hard as possible. But 1x tippet is plenty strong enough, so not much opportunity for this carp to break me off, long as I bide my time. Sometimes you have the line hooked on the dorsal fin of the carp, and I like to just unhook it so that I can play the fish in the mouth, and this ties them out much quicker. Grab the net quickly and get ready to net this beautiful fish. Fish looks in good condition, looks like a wild carp, long and thin, good condition, and in the net. Job well done. That's a beautiful carp, nice scale pattern, really good neck. Time to tweak out the hook, admire the fish. And then promptly let her go. Off she goes. And now it's time for round 2. The carp have moved back into the area. There's about 5 of them feeding in a tight group. I can see the tails moving as they feed with their heads down, probably eating bloodworm larvae and dragonfly larvae. Trying to make really accurate casts. Eventually get the right cast to the right fish, and he eats it, set the hook, and he's on. It's a beautiful summer's day, incredibly hot, and this is not as big as the last carp, but he'll do. Trying to again put as much pressure on the fish as possible to land him quickly. Play him out nice and gently, using a size 10 hook on this fly. I found that on this lake the smaller fly tended to work much better. White flies also worked. The black and red combination was still the best one to use on the day. And fish is in the net. Time to admire the fish. Much darker than the previous one. Tweak out the hook and release the fish. It can be very difficult to spot carp in low light conditions or if there's excessive glare on the water, but I've developed a technique called bubble bashing, where you look out for carp feeding bubbles and you target these. One of the best flies to use for this technique is the carp maggot, but you can also use the carp fritz. Use at least 1x tippet for this technique because you just never know the size of the fish that you might hook. I'm casting over these bubbles as the carp feed. I'm trying to get the fly right in front of the carp's mouth. Simply what happens is when the carp feeds and it releases these bubbles, it marks the spot exactly where the fish is feeding. So if you can get that fly to sink directly on top of these bubbles, there's a good chance that the fly will sink directly in the carp's window. Watch the indicator very carefully. If it twitches or jerks, set the hook as quickly as possible into a fast running carp here that's intent on heading for Australia by the looks of things. As you can see, it's quite late and this carp is going. It's not a very big fish, but it's just incredibly fit. I developed this bubble bashing technique many years ago at Princess Play in the canal there. I'd often fish late in the afternoon and the light conditions were not very good, but by concentrating on the bubbles with the indicator I caught a lot of fish. I'm sure that this technique will help you to catch plenty as well. It's not only for low light conditions. There's often waters around the country and in the world where the water clarity is so murky it's difficult to spot anything. But if you can see those feeding bubbles in about 1.5 meters or less depth, then there's a good chance that if you get the fly on these bubbles all the time, you'll hook into some cracking carp. This technique is very difficult to do without the indicator system because that take when it comes is very subtle. The indicator will normally twitch once or twice and that's it. And if you spot that and set the hook, you'll hook them every time in the mouth. And this is very important. Sometimes if the carp is very quick on the take, the indicator might shoot off, but this very rarely happens. This is a lovely common carp. Looks to be around about 3.5 kilograms in weight. I've tried a lot of different indicator systems, but the one that works best for me and the one that's the most versatile is the floating putty. I've also done very well using a yarn indicator. These ones don't come off as easily as the putty. This was one of the first carp that I caught on the bubble bashing technique at Princess Play. It's about a 5 kilogram fish. This one weighed 12 kilograms. I was catching quite a few on this technique and suddenly this one showed up. Gave me a big surprise. Now I'm going to show you the effectiveness of the bubble bashing technique in very demanding conditions. This is a local day ticket water. There are several carp anglers around the lake and they haven't caught anything yet, as well as quite a few bass fishermen. I've waded out onto a spot where I can see some carp bubbles ranging from 10 meters away to 25 meters. The fly I'm using is a size 8 carp fritz with a tungsten bead. And I'm using a big yarn indicator that's black and orange in order to see it at range, and because of the very bad light conditions, I'm looking directly into the sun and I'm casting into a slight breeze as well, which makes things very interesting. I'm fishing over a very muddy bottom that's very rich in bloodworm, and the depth is about 1 meter to 1 meter and a bit, so I've set the indicator at 1.5 meters so that the fly will lie right on the bottom. I'm fishing in late summer and the water level is actually quite low for this lake, but I can see a lot of carp feeding bubbles in front of me and that's very promising. Looking directly into the glare is not the easiest thing in the world, but I like to look slightly to the left and the right of it because it helps me to spot the bubbles much easier. The chop on the water also makes conditions very difficult. Now it's just down to perseverance, getting that fly onto as many bubbles as possible, and sooner or later one of them is bound to make a mistake. And after about 2 hours of fishing, finally success! I'm into a good fish. And this is where a fly line with very little, if any, stretch helps a lot. Last thing you want is to try and set the hook at range with a very springy fly line, because you'll miss more than you hit. Because I know that there are monsters in this lake, I'm using Nortex tippet, because these fish are incredibly strong. And when they start running around the place, they can be a handful, believe me. Pumping this fish in, he ran a long way, but then he started to turn around and come towards me, so at one stage I was reeling for my life, but eventually managed to get the fish nice and close, and using the full backbone of this rod to play the fish out. It's essential with a big carp like this one to take your time, put steady pressure on the fish, but don't overdo it. There aren't any snags close by, so I can take my time and play the fish out. If I need to, I can use side strain, but I don't want to use too many angles on this fish because the hook hold doesn't seem to be that great. My leader setup in this instance is very basic. I've got a short section of thicker line of about 0.40mm diameter, and that goes directly onto the tippet, which is about 1.5 meters long. And finally, fish is in the net, and that's a brilliant carp. Nice and fat, full of muscle. That's a result. Wet my hands in the net and gently cradle the fish. That's a beautiful carp. Nice common carp in good condition. Admire her and then gently lower her back into the water so that she can swim off. And this carp is very tired, but that's a job well done because the conditions were definitely not great. And no one else around the lake caught any carp on bait. Well, that's the bubble bashing technique. It's an excellent technique to know because in most of the lakes that I know it works extremely well, and it will catch carp that you can't see actively to stalk. I've caught some very big carp recently using this technique. Let's take a good look at carp flies now. Good tackle and the right presentation is useless without the correct fly. One thing that is very important on a carp fly is that it needs to have a very sharp hook, and I normally like to crush the barb so that it goes in easier and it's easier to take out at the end as well. Above all, however, the hook needs to be incredibly strong because these carp could run anywhere from 5 to 20 kilograms, you just never know. These fish can easily open up substandard hooks. Over the last 20 years I've experimented with a lot of different patterns, sizes of flies, types of hooks, and the list that follows is the ones that I've found to be the best overall. This is my fly box, and as I've said before, I've had a criminal amount of fun fly fishing for carp. You can see a predomination of black and red, white and yellow flies. Also like black and yellow as a change. And the fly that I've caught the most carp on by far is the Carp bugger. I developed it many years ago and it works exceptionally well. Many other anglers have also had excellent success with this pattern. I think it's the contrast between the black and the red that really stands out to the carp, and the little red tail at the end, composed of marabou, looks like a bloodworm trying to burrow back into the sand. A more recent pattern that's a bit easier to tie than the Carp bugger but does the same job is the Carp Marabou SMS. SMS stands for Sean Moll Special, and I've had excellent success recently with this pattern. Another excellent and very easy to tie pattern is the Carp maggot, and I find this fly very successful normally in dirty water just after rain, and especially good for bubble bashing techniques. The fly that's caught the second most amount of carp for me is the Carp Fritz. I developed this fly a few years ago as an easier to tie variation on the Carp bugger. It's very different because of the synthetic materials in the body, and you can vary the color of the bead in the front. You can also use tungsten beads if you need the fly to get down deeper, but this is an excellent carp fly. Carp consume vast amounts of bloodworm or midge larvae, and this is an imitation of that. Looks quite realistic, although it's a bit bigger than the average bloodworm. Several of my largest carp have fallen to this pattern. I also tie a full marabou bloodworm pattern, which works in difficult situations. This is the Berg River in Paarl, and the water clarity has improved since they built the Berg River Dam, to the point that it's an excellent venue now for stalking carp again. There's a whole group of them here in the large size range, and these river carp are exceptionally fit. I'm using a black and red marabou carp fly on 1x tippet, and I'm sight fishing and trying to be as sneaky as possible, casting the fly to sighted fish, trying not to spook them in the process. Very tricky, but if you get it right, the results are spectacular. And fish on. That one ate the fly on the drop. The fishing is a little bit more tricky than in a lake situation because of the flow of the water. Means that the fly can drift in the water and sink extremely unpredictably. But the carp on the whole can be a lot more aggressive when they take the fly, which certainly helps a lot. I'm using a 6-weight rod, 9 foot long, floating line once again, and trying my best to land these very strong fish. It's all about using the rod to your advantage, trying to put maximum strain on the fish and knowing when to let go of that line, so as not to snap either the rod or the line. Using lots of side strain here, really clamping down hard on that fly line. Net is within easy reach. It's a nice big model, and first go in the net. That's a good fish, and I'm really chuffed with this one. That is a superb fish. Nice river common carp, and he took that fly really well. Lay the carp on the nice soft grass. Time for some pictures. Check the hook out as well. And time for the release. That's a beautiful carp. Nothing wrong with that one. Nice and fat. Good condition. Lay the carp upstream in the river. Wait for it to recover its strength, then let go. There she goes. I'm very happy about that carp. That was a good one. This river has a lot of overhanging grass, and the carp love to feed underneath it in the shelter of it. The water is a little bit warmer just out of the current as well, and they like this a lot. Cast to the fish, fish eats it, and I'm in again. And this one is also very strong, a little bit bigger than the last one, so I've got my hands full this time. One of the biggest mistakes that I find that people make when targeting carp is to strip the fly. It's just about the worst thing that you can do. The best retrieve is no retrieve. That's what I've found over 20 odd years of targeting them on fly. You've got to cast that fly, draw it back and let it sink right in front of the carp with no movement. Just let it sink and leave it. even if it lies on the bottom for a few seconds. If the carp wants it, he will swim over to it and eat it. Once you see that carp eat the fly, then you really have to set the hook very quickly, because they won't give you a second chance. Then you just got to hang on and hope, because these fish are exceptionally strong. Another very important aspect of fly fishing for carp is confidence. I just have so much confidence in the fact that if I present my fly to enough carp in a day, one or two or more of them will eat the fly, and if I'm on my guard, I'll hook them. Many people start fly fishing for carp, and what they find is that they're not successful after a few hours, and then they just give up. And this fish is ready for the net. Get him in the net, bit of coaxing, and there you go. That's a very beautiful fish. Really good condition, strong as anything. Let's see what this one looks like in the light. Cradle of fish, and that's a good 14-15 pounds. Beautiful fish, nothing wrong with that one. And this is what you can get if you just keep at it, use the right flies and the right technique. One last look at the fish and time for the release. About 2 weeks later, I decide to try for these very spooky Berg River carp again. This time round, however, it's very overcast, and this will present very challenging conditions for stalking carp and fly, and I'll explain why later. There's a cold front on the way as well, and if there's one thing carp don't like, it's a low pressure system, so if you want challenging fishing, this is going to be it. This is my Carp Fritz size 8 with a 4mm bead on 1x tippet, and the fish are very skittish today, so my life is not going to be easy. It's overcast, as you can see, and that's very bad news for me, because that means that the carp can see me very easily and it's harder for me to spot them in time. Most of the fish that I can see at the moment are cruisers, but every now and then one stops to feed, and these are the high percentage targets. Because of the flow of the water, it's very difficult to get the fly exactly where you want it, and the carp tend to move their feeding position often, so this is very high grade fishing. The trick here is to make as many casts as possible to as many fish as you can without spooking them. Not easy. And eventually, when you get the right cast, the right fish, the right presentation for the right time, and the carp sucks it in and you see it, you'll hook him. When that happens, then you're in for a really good time. I know a lot of people that fish the Berg River and Paarl often for carp, and they catch relatively few fish, so any carp that you hook in this river is an achievement of note. This is not the biggest carp in the world, but he's pulling very strongly, as these carp do. And I've got my net at the ready, waiting into position to land him easier, using lots of side strain. This puts the carp off balance and makes them much easier to land in the end. Look at this rod bend. I like to use a 6-weight rod with a lot of backbone, but a forgiving tip, and this allows me to cast short range easily and yet put a lot of pressure on a hooked carp. Get the net ready. I like a net with a nice long handle, makes netting these carp much easier, and this one's in the net. In addition to the common carp, there are also mirror carp, ghost carp, and a few koi as well, so there's quite a bit of variety in this river. Size wise, they can reach a weight in excess of 12 kilograms from the system. That's a handful. I always have a pair of forceps on me in case the carp sucks the fly in quite deeply. Fortunately, this one was quite easy to unhook. Let's see how big it is. There we are. About 2 kilograms. But man, did it fight strongly. River carp or something else. Lay the carp gently in the water and let us swim off. Well done. Time for the next one. Now let's have a look at what these river carp eat. Turned over some rocks in the river. These are caddis pupa. There's a lot of them. A few mayflies. And this is what the carp will be rooting on the bottom for, in addition to bloodworm on the salt beds. The insect on the left, the biggest one, is a halgramite, but a juvenile one. These ones can get very large. Now, who said carp were lazy? This is a Berg River carp feeding in the middle of a rapid. It's holding position in a very strong current. There's 2 of them there. And you can see this clear patch in the middle of the grass, and that's because these carp are feeding in this area specifically a lot, and it's cleaned the whole area. So it's good to know these things. This one's holding up current, and because of the shape of the head, which is wedge shaped, the force of the water pushes the head down so it can stay rooted in one spot in very fast currents. I did try nymphing for this carp and swinging flies in front of them, but with no success. So with a little bit of thought, I decided to move into a new area. If you want to catch river carp on fly, you need to do a lot of walking. And I found a new area with a lot of carp feeding on the bottom. It looked like they were eating bloodworm. So I selected a new carp fritz with slightly heavier dumbbell eyes, simply because these carp were in slightly deeper water and I wanted the flies to get right down onto the feeding the bubbles. And this is a closer look at this fly. Size 8 hook, very sharp, strong, with heavy dumbbell eyes, just to get straight down. These fish are very active, and there's some good ones among them, so at this stage the heart is racing. Trying to be as sneaky as possible, wade very slowly. These carp don't like those shock waves if you wade too heavily. These fish are feeding and moving very rapidly, so often I get the fly in the right zone but the fish has moved on. So it's a case of making lots and lots of casts, dip casts, overhead casts, whatever I can use just to get the fly in front of the fish. And eventually I get the right cast, fish eats it, and I'm on. And now the fun begins, because this is a much bigger fish. Using a large arbor reel, which definitely helps. Nice smooth drag. And that's one thing about these carp, they will test your reel, because you will use it on every single carp that you hook. Once again, lots of side strain. Try to keep the carp off balance. I've watched a lot of fly fishers playing carp, and most of the ones that I've seen don't put nearly enough pressure on the carp early on. I think they're scared that their rod will snap, and I suppose this is the case sometimes, but you really have to put as much pressure on these fish as you can, otherwise they'll run you all over the place. Look at this rod bending. I'm really putting as much pressure on as I possibly can. Because of the force of the current, it does make life difficult, but if you know your rod well, you know exactly how much pressure you can exert on a fish. A nice smooth drag on a reel is absolutely essential. As you can see, this is a large arbor reel. Helps me to wind line in very quickly if the fish runs towards me, which carp often do. You've got to bide your time, be patient, but always put as much pressure on as you can. If you find that the carp is just about to head down a rapid or into some grass where you can't get him out, give him lots of slack straight away. Normally he'll stop. When he's swum out of the danger area again, then you can exert pressure again. But normally if you give them a lot of slack at one time, they'll stop swimming at the same speed. This doesn't always work, but often it does, so it's good to keep in mind. This fish is trying to keep me in the weeds here, but I'm just keeping pressure on the fish all the time and showing him who's boss. That's a beautiful fish. Look at those rubbery lips. Fly right in the side of the mouth. And this fish is starting to tire out nicely. Almost ready for the net. It helps to have the net handy. This one is on my back. I can just flick it open and it's loose, so I can slide the telescopic bit open so for more reach. And this one is in the net. And that is really a job well done. And as you can see, these carp are fin perfect in mint condition. Lean, mean fighting machines. That's a beautiful common carp. Tweak the hook out, and if you want to weigh the fish, it's best to do it in the net. This one's 5.5 kilograms or 12 pounds. And then afterwards, go back to the water and gently release the fish. This is the inlet into the lake just after rain, and these carp are reveling in the fresh water that's well oxygenated, and they're feeding on the bottom on bloodworm and other insects. Earthworms are also a prime candidate for carp food after heavy rains. They'll be washed in from the lawns higher up. I've just come off work and I've got a 5-weight rod with me, using a 9-foot long leader to 1x tippet, and these fish are actively feeding. The trick here is not to spook them. You have to really plan your attack. Try to target the closest fish. If that fly line lands over another feeding carp, it might spook it, and that fish might spook the fish that you're targeting. So it's very interesting fishing this. This is quite late in the evening, so spotting conditions are getting harder and harder. The water is quite cool, but these fish are very active because of that rain, and this is the key in winter fishing. As usual, the whole trick is to get that fly right in front of the feeding carp without spooking him, and then watch his reaction. If he sucks that fly in, you just have to set the hook as quickly as possible. This is great fishing. What could be better than this after a hard day at work? Usually in the winter months I try to target areas that have inlets where the water levels will rise, and they'll normally cloud up as well, which is actually a very good thing. Helps you to get much closer to those fish than you usually would be able to. And I find winter fishing after rain is very good. The rest of the time when there isn't much rain, the fishing can be a lot harder. So I like to plan my fishing trips around rain. This is obviously in the western Cape region. In the rest of South Africa, the main rainfall period is in the summer months. However, in the winter the waters up north tend to clear up a lot more, so it can be easier to spot fish. Try to look for shallow bays where the sun can warm the water up in the afternoon, and you'll usually be successful in these areas. A few days later I went for a return visit after work. Changed the indicator for a yarn type to see if that would work better, using a bloodworm pattern because that's what these fish are eating, and I'm using a clear fly line to see if that would work any better than using a conventional one. The yarn indicator was quite easy to see, however I found that the putty one was much easier to move up and down and worked just as well. Eventually I hooked into a nice carp that ran a long way. Large arbor reel certainly helps to handle these fish. Water was a lot murkier due to recent rain, and this is exactly what these carp like. So murky water is not always a bad thing. especially if the water is not too deep. You can get very close to them, and using the indicator system you can hit them just about every time. One of the big things to remember with winter fishing is to stay warm, dry and comfortable. The longer you can stay dry and comfortable, the longer you can concentrate and you'll actually enjoy your fishing. So invest in good quality clothing that will keep you warm. I also find that gumboots are the best thing to use around muddy banks, especially on after work sessions. It's nothing worse than trying to clean out an expensive pair of hiking shoes after it's been trampled with mud. After extended use, I found that the clear fly line did work well, however it was not as hardy as a conventional fly line for some reason. One very big advantage of fishing after and during rain in the winter months is that, very importantly, it keeps the bankside disturbance from passers-by and dog walkers to a bare minimum. This is a lovely common carp, good condition, nice fat pre-spawn female, and this one's going to go back to eat, get bigger and hopefully be caught another day. One thing about catching winter carp is that they're normally in excellent condition. They like that cool water very often, as long as it's not too cold, and they feed actively normally towards the end of the day when the water heats up. So you need to bear this in mind. These carp were caught during and just after very heavy rain, and as you can see, these are big fish in good condition. They certainly gave me a good go on the 6-weight rod. This is a very interesting river system in that it is both lake fed and tidal at the same time, and the carp that live in it grow to massive proportions. So let's see how I get on today using the carp fritz with a very strong and sharp hook. This particular river has a large amount of bloodworm which the carp gorge themselves on. The red tail in the carp fritz imitates the bloodworm as they try to burrow back in the sand. I've armed myself with a 7-weight rod with a lot of backbone because I'm going to need it if I hook into one of these fish. I've seen a carp, he's feeding underneath some reeds. I'm using 8-pound Maxima line, which is about a 0.25mm diameter, and 1X. But up to now, no success. So I just keep trying. I haven't spooked the fish yet. It's all about accuracy. Get that fly right in front of the fish's mouth and hope that he sees it and sucks it in. And finally, success. Fish on. And this one is heading out into the heavy flow, so I've got my work cut out for me. And there's nothing I can do now. No way I can horse this fish. I'll just break him off. And I'm starting to run back towards me. This carp is taking no prisoners. It's trying to stay deep, then gets into the flow and runs all over the place. Now patience is the order of the game. If you don't have patience, you can have a very bad time, that's for sure. These fish just go and go and go. It takes them a long time to tire, and you just have to bide your time. And this is the trick with big fish. Bide your time, wait for the right moment to net that fish. Always keep a nice tight line and steady pressure. I can see from the girth of this fish that it's got a lot of weight behind it. It's a big fish, so I need to really be patient, stay calm at all times. A little bit worried at the moment. Fish has got me into the heavy flow. There's a little bit of structure down there, so I'm mindful of this. But using the backbone of the rod, eventually managed to get some form of control over the fish. And this is why having a rod with a lot of backbone near the butt section is essential in targeting big carp. It's no use using a 2 or a 3 weight rod with no backbone and looking to fish this size. Get my net ready. Helps if you have that net ready in with one hand. Once you get the fish in the net, watch how I lift it up, straight up, so as not to bend the net, because this is a heavy fish. Lay the fish down on the soft grass so it doesn't get injured. Well, this is the result that I was hoping for. Let's lift this one up, get a good look at it. 10 kilograms of common carp in excellent condition. What more could you ask for than this? I'm very excited about this fish. Beautiful. Cradle the fish, transport it back to the water and release her. Off she goes. Although the water is very strong and dirty, on the sides of the main flow I can often see the tails of the carp as it feeds. I can see one at the moment, so I'm moving into position, trying to get the fly in front of the fish before it changes its mind and moves off. I'm still using the black and red size 8 carp Fritz, because this fly works very well in all types of water, but especially this kind of dirtyish water. Size 8 is good because of the water clarity. It's easier for the carp to spot. Dipping that fly in, letting it drift around right where the fish is feeding, and by some stroke of luck I managed to see the carp inhale the fly, and I set the hook and the fight is on. Look at that rod bend. At this stage adrenaline is flowing through my veins. This fish is even bigger than the last one. I can feel that power as it swims off. And I just know I'm in a lot of trouble. This is what fly fishing for carp is all about. This fish made it into this heavy flow, and eventually it made it all the way across. So I'm trying to stay in control, keep a nice tight line. Then I have to decide to stay in the same spot, or the wiser option is to move with the fish. You can see it's right on the other side, so I have to move. No other option now. So walk all the way around the main flow, get into control again, avoid the hyacinth, and put maximum strain on the fish. Once you get the fish in structure like this, it's essential to maintain contact. You have to try and bully the fish within reason. Now it's time to get the net ready, and just keep that pressure on. I have to walk into the water really carefully, get as close to this fish as possible without spooking it. Draw the net in and over the fish. Easy does it, and finally she's mine. And the smile says it all. I'm happy about this fish. This is awesome. And this is what it's all about for me. This is a 12 kilogram common carp. It's a female in excellent condition. That's around about 26.5 pounds. Time now to gently put the fish back and let her swim off. That's a job well done. Grass carp were first brought into South Africa from Malaysia in 1967 for aquatic weed control, and they've been very successful at this. Although they share the same name as the common carp. They are very different in both looks and feeding habits. Their primary food source is definitely aquatic vegetation, however they will opportunistically eat aquatic nymphs and terrestrial flies as well. These very unique fish can reach a size of more than a meter long and weights in excess of 50 kilograms. They're also relatively long-lived. These particular grass carp are from 16 to 20 kilograms in weight or more, and that will be a real handful on a fly rod. One of the best flies that I've found for grass carp is the hare's-ear nymph with an orange bead in about a size 10 or 8. Usually use it on 1x tippet, and this is outdoor arena in Bonnievale, and it's home to some very large grass carp. The water in the lakes is generally quite murky, however the grass carp tend to cruise just under the surface, so they're quite easy to see due to their large size. What I normally try to do is to cast the fly in front of a cruising fish and let the fly sink. If the fish is interested, it will normally go down after the fly and suck it in. If you watch your leader very carefully, you'll normally see it twitch. This is your cue to set the hook, and you need to be very quick at this, otherwise you'll miss the fish. If you do it properly, however, you'll hook into a nice grass carp like this one. These fish are exceptionally strong and they can jump as well. Other flies that work well are the red setter wet fly, a DDD dry fly in about a size 10, and an Adams parachute. One way to entice the grass carp to feed is to grab a handful of grass, throw it on the surface of the water and get them eating off the top. In this way you can induce them to eat a dry fly. Grass carp were never supposed to breed in South Africa, however they seem to have done very well, if not too well, in the Vaal River. Their natural range is in Asia, where they inhabit large river systems. It's quite interesting to note that the original wild carp is also a riverine species. I would highly recommend a 6-weight or larger rod to handle these fish. For some reason I wound up hooking this one on a 4-weight and it's giving me a good go. The shape of the head of this fish resembles a mullet more than a carp. You'll also notice how long and thin it is, with a very robust body, and the eyes are in line with the mouth. Very unusual. There is a short single dorsal fin on top of the back, and the tail is deeply forked. After a 15-minute tussle of note, I eventually managed to land the grass carp. Not the biggest specimen on earth, but job well done. Time to tweak out the hook, admire the fish, and release her back into the water. Well, a few hours later I managed to hook another one. This one is a little bit bigger, and after a long fight finally managed to tie the carp out. These fish are exceptionally fit, and you really have to be careful when playing them so you don't snap up. Once again I'm using the 4-weight rod. I would highly recommend something a little bit more robust. Time to slide the fish out onto the grass, and that is a much bigger fish. Well, these grass carp are certainly not the easiest species to catch on fly, but they are certainly well worth trying for. This has certainly been one of my most successful flies for carp, the humble carp fritz. Over the last decade I've used it almost exclusively to catch many hundreds of these hard fighting fish. My biggest on the carp fritz weighed more than 13.5 kilograms, and that is a real handful on any rod, let alone a fly rod. This fly has developed quite a large following here in South Africa. It's even starting to spread over the world now as an awesome fish catching fly, but particularly for carp. I've even seen it in 1 or 2 publications, and several fly shops even stock them now. The good news is that it's very easy to tie. First slip on a gold tungsten bead. Next stick some black 6/0 thread, wind it back down to the hook bend, trim off the excess thread, and then come back again. Lay down a nice thread base and wind back down to the hook bend again. Next take some red marabou. You can also use red wool if you don't have marabou, and tie that down facing backwards as a tail. I like to trim the excess off, keep the tail fairly short. Next select some black Fritz chenille and tie that down facing backwards. Line the chenille up with the black thread, hold them together and wind forward. About 3 wraps is enough. Untangle it and then tie down just behind the bead. Trim the excess thread off. Next, need to do a half hitch, another half hitch, whip finish knot, and then you can trim off the excess thread. I developed the carp maggot fly for use in smaller ponds and lakes, and the success of this pattern has been amazing. I think the main attribute of this fly is that it's very easy to tie and it sinks at a high rate, but you don't need a very heavy bead to get the fly down, and because it's a light pattern it doesn't make that much splash when you're casting on top of feeding bubbles, and this is great if you bubble bashing, and it also works very well on carp that have seen everything else. Just slip on a black or a gold brass bead, 4mm or 3.5mm is fine. Take some thread, using brown in this case, 6/0, wind down the shank as far as you can go, trim the excess thread. Next take some white chenille and tie it on top of the hook shank, facing backwards. Wind the thread forward. Next select the white chenille and wind it forward in close butting turns. This is quite a small chenille. You can also use fluffier and thicker chenille as well. Tie the chenille down just behind the bead, trim the excess thread, and then finish off with a whip finish just behind the bead. Trim the excess thread and you're done. The Carp Marabou SMS is a recent addition to my carp fly armory, and it's pretty much replaced the carp bugger for me these days. It's an exceptional producer of all sizes of carp, and it's very easy to tie as well, and marabou I find is a lot easier to find in black than many other materials. Even when stationary, the marabou in the body and the tail pulses enticingly in the water, and I think this really turns the carp on.
Start the thread off, wind down to the hook bend, trim the excess thread, wind back again to the hook eye. Next, take some bath chain eyes. These are extra large. I use medium ones as well. All depends on how fast I want the fly to sink. Using crisscross wraps just to secure. And you've quite a bit of force to secure these eyes. And you can see how they sit. Next, run the thread back down to the hook bend. Select some red or yellow marabou. Tie it in facing back. If you can't find this marabou in the fly shop, try looking in the haberdashery. I often have marabou. Next, select some long black marabou and tie it in facing back. This marabou doesn't actually come from a marabou stalk anymore, it's actually from a turkey, believe it or not. Next, line the marabou up with the thread like that and wind it forward. Tie it down and then finish off with a whip finish knot. To the excess thread,